I do want to say that your beliefs are your beliefs, and I respect your right to have those beliefs, just as I hope you respect my right to have mine. I'm not trying to change your mind with anything I'm saying here. I'm just saying and sharing what I believe. I have no problem with you no matter what you believe, whether you believe in a God, whether you don't believe in a God, whether you believe in many gods. I respect you on the same level no matter what. I only have a problem when someone tries to tell me what I should believe because they believe it or because they say so, which unfortunately happens a lot on all sides of this issue. There's a very distinct pattern that happens when this type of thing happened in the church, and it's not all the same every time, and there's some variation, but there is a definite pattern. Basically, a claim that a child has been molested or sexually assaulted or whatever it is comes into the church. The church tells them, "Don't worry, we'll investigate it." They don't. The police will be sometimes involved. The police will come to the church. The church will say, "We're also investigating it. We'll share the results with you. We'll work with you," and then they don't. Surprise, surprise. Now, when enough claims come in against a priest, and that priest becomes too hot for an area, they just shuffle the priests around. They just move them around to a new area and let him molest more children. That's what the cardinals did. That's and the bishops. That's what they did to protect these priests. They didn't care about the children. There was no effort to care about these children. It was just, we need to protect these priests from getting in trouble. And so actually, before I go into that, how many times do you think these priests were shuffled? It got too hot in one place, okay, we'll shuffle you to the next area. It gets too hot there, we'll shuffle you to the next area. How many children in how many different areas got molested because, instead of stopping this, we'll just let you do it somewhere else. That behavior is just like, I don't know. I don't know as a human being how you could see that your priests, say you're in charge of these priests, how you could then see them and be like, "Oh yeah, no problem, we'll just protect you and move you over here." I would be the one first in line to see that all of these priests came to justice. I would be giving all the information to the police. But no, instead, let's just hide the issue, let's not talk about it, let's move the priest around and let them continue. And eventually, when they do have to settle, because people will sue them off of damages, mental and or physical, for being molested, they settle outside of court, because of course they do. They don't want facts on record about what happened. And they can make clauses in the settlement agreement that say that the victim, is not allowed to talk about the incidents in question. So we really don't know how many times they've settled. We don't know how much they give out in each settlement. They don't have to tell us that. We know it's millions in the US alone, but we don't know how much exactly. We don't know how many people that covers. We don't know any of that, and the church doesn't have to share that. And the people who sue them aren't allowed because of these clauses in the settlements. And so I mentioned earlier that a cardinal had been defrocked by Pope Francis. Pope Francis has started defrocking priests and other employees. Basically, defrocking is essentially forced retirement from the church. Basically, you're not allowed to work for the church, or which essentially the church washes their hands of the individual and says you're too far gone and we don't want you a part of us anymore. The problem with this is that these people who have been defrocked face no criminal accountability because the church doesn't turn them into the authorities, and they can no longer work for the church, which means they're just pushed into regular society. So they're not watched. No one knows about them. And, oh, here you go live in society now where there's a lot of children that you could potentially molest. We don't even know who a lot of these people are. We know some of the people who've been defrocked, but we don't know. And another big issue when it comes to this whole molestation thing, and I've talked to an individual about this, a lot of priests are put on a pedestal in their congregation's eyes. The people who go to that church see this priest as some holier than thou person, and there's no way they could be bad. They're only good. I knew someone who we were talking about this priest, and this individual made a slight negative remark about something that this priest had done, and it wasn't even a bad thing. It was like a slight constructive criticism on this priest, and their mother exploded. How dare you say anything bad? You can't say anything bad about the priest. Da, 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 da. And that was like a minor criticism over essentially nothing. And so just imagine what it's like for those people who were molested and go to their family and say they're molested. And just imagine their reaction if someone can't take a minor constructive criticism towards their priest. Imagine something like a charge of molestation. I actually know an individual who was molested by a priest. He's an older individual at this point, but he came forward to his family, and his family essentially said, how dare you? You can't say horrible things like this about him. He's a great man. And basically took him and forced him to apologize to this priest who had molested him. And because he stick to his guns, and because he stick to his, yes, I was molested by this priest, they ostracized him and kicked him out of the family. Because he wouldn't retract his accusations. Now, this priest actually later admitted to molesting children, but his family still won't talk to him, because in their mind, he's the problem, not the priest. I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine being a child, being molested, and then having your family, who is supposed to protect you at all costs, then say, no, you're the problem, and not even believe your claims. Religion does weird things to people, in my opinion. That's one of the reasons I'm not for it. And this brings me to my absolutely least favorite pope ever, Pope Benedict XVI. If you saw my video all about the AIDS crisis, I talked for a short time about him and why I don't like him. He, on a trip to England, said that the Nazis' atheism was what made them bad. Not their anti-Semitism, their atheism. Basically suggesting that atheism is worse than anti-Semitism by saying that. I guess he would know, because as I said in that video, he was a Hitler Youth as a child, so I guess he would know better than I would. But hey, he also, during that AIDS crisis, went to Africa and said that condoms would make the crisis worse, even though all the empirical data and all the evidence shows that it is exactly the opposite. Condoms help prevent the spread of HIV and AIDS. But he can say whatever he wants. He's the Pope. He's the closest man to God. So let's talk about what he did with with this whole issue. Now, there's no evidence that he ever molested children. I don't think there were ever any accusations of that either. And I'm not trying to say there were. That being said, we do know that as a cardinal, Pope Benedict shuffled around multiple priests who were known to molest children in churches as part of his diocese. And there's a story of a priest that was placed at a school for the deaf, which is different from the one in Italy, I believe. I don't think it was the same. It was the same school, but American bishops actually came to Pope Benedict. He wasn't pope at the time, but he was the cardinal, and said it might be embarrassing for the church if the church did not act, and they suggested defrocking this priest. Now, can I just point out, they weren't worried about the sake of the children. They weren't worried about the children being molested. They were worried about the embarrassment to the church. Talk about your priorities, right? And so Benedict didn't do anything, and this priest went on to molest over 200 children at this school. So he is complicit, even if he didn't do it. When he became second in command to Pope John Paul II, he was well aware of the increasing number of sexual assaults and molestations and accusations that were happening within the church. He was also aware that many priests and other employees of the church were being investigated by police forces worldwide. And as a result of this, he sent out a memo for every church employee, and essentially this memo said, do not talk or cooperate with the police in any way, or you may be excommunicated from the church. We're doing our own investigation, and we will deal with matters internally. How did that investigation go? How did he deal with those matters internally? He didn't. Nothing happened. And worse than that, almost, when police were about to arrest certain individuals, he would have them flown via private planes that the Vatican owns back to the Vatican or to parts of Italy that the Vatican controls, with no extradition, so they couldn't be charged. Now, there is something interesting that happened with Pope Benedict XVI. Typically, popes serve as pope until they die. That's part of the job description. Benedict is the first pope since the 1400s to leave office alive, and he stepped down in 2013. Now, it was rumored that a report was about to be released showing just how much of a role Benedict had in the suppression of evidence of molestation of children around the world. And the theory was that basically a deal was struck within the church that report wouldn't be published if Benedict stepped down. Now, there's absolutely zero way to confirm this, and it is just rumor and speculation, so I would suggest taking it with a grain of salt, but it's very interesting that A, he did step down, and B, it was right around the time that this report was supposed to be published, and then all of a sudden the report didn't get published. So, I don't know, take it with a grain of salt, like I said, but it is a lot of conveniences. And a lot of coincidences, if that wasn't the case. So, unfortunately, and the real thing that I want to focus in on is that there has been very little justice for those affected by this. Yes, the church will give money. That's great. I actually talked to my ex about this when we were still together. And she's like, "Oh, well, the church offers what's it called? Therapy for anyone who was potentially molested for free." And I'm like, I hope it's not within the church, because I hope it's an outside source. Because why, if I was one of those individuals that had been sexually assaulted or molested by the church, why then would I want to go back to the church to get therapy? So I hope it's outside the church. I don't know. I didn't really follow through with that at the time to see if it was actually within the church that they were getting this or not. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but who knows. I do also, by the way, want to point out that there are still priests practicing today with accusations against them. Now, I do have to mention here that I do believe that you are innocent until proven guilty. So just because accusations have been laid does not mean that that priest is automatically guilty. That being said, there's such a pattern of cover-up that it's difficult not to take all of these accusations as almost pure guilt. The church has made it almost impossible for any of their clergy to be charged. So unfortunately, all of these are just going to be accusations, and people are eventually ready to step forward. Then you have to deal, like I said, with the statute of limitations on a lot of these cases. There were a couple taken to court in the U.S. and in other countries, and they were thrown out because the statute of limitations had been passed. So right now in the U.S., only 3% of all priests that had been accused of sexual assault or molestation of children have been convicted, and only 2% have actually received prison sentences. So most of them are free. Most of them still work as priests. Some of them have been defrocked, some of them have left the church, some of them have died. But quite honestly, I guarantee there are still priests that are working today that were accused of molesting children. I hope it's not your priest at your church if you have children. That's all I'm saying. And if I were you, I wouldn't want any priest getting too friendly with mine. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. Incidentally, by the way, it's not just the Catholic Church that has this problem. There are other churches that have this issue too. There's actually something that all of these churches have in common. And it's that they don't let their priests marry or have children. If you actually look at the numbers from churches that allow their priests to marry versus numbers that don't allow their priests to marry, there is a distinct line in the sand where it's like 99.9% of all of the cases are from churches that don't allow their priests to marry. There have been some studies done that show that a man's brain is affected if he doesn't have sex a certain amount, and it's in a natural state for any animal, and that's basically what they're asking these priests to be, is completely unnatural to their biology. But they have a higher calling. Well, they're still human. They're human first, in fact. I hate this idea that we think that the priests or bishops or cardinals, popes, whatever you want to name, that they're higher than humanity. They're not. They're human first. They were born human. They are human. Get over it. They should not be put on a pedestal. No one should ever, period. And that's a big problem. The other problem is, obviously, it's an age-old saying, but it's true. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so these people had all the power. These people had absolute power. We're talking about what happens to you after death and God here. That's absolute power. You don't think that corrupts someone? Of course it does. Come on. And so all of that combined, it has been a horrible, horrible problem. Now, I will say that the church is doing some things to try and fix this problem at this point. Like I said, Pope Francis has started defrocking individuals within the church. Whether defrocking actually helps or not, but he also, in May of 2019, issued a new church law requiring all Catholic priests and nuns around the world to report any type of sexual abuse by clergy and any cover-ups by their superiors to church authorities. Now, who knows if they will actually report it? Who knows if it will help? At this point, there are so many people that have been affected by this, potentially millions and millions of people. Is it too late for them? Not only that, but what happens if someone does report it? What's actually going to happen? Because if we look at what's happened in the past, the answer is going to be very little.